Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Show. This is a very personal episode because in this episode, I'm going to be talking about my own father wound. Basically, the origin story of how it started, what I did about it, and why I've created this epic course for other people with father wounds. You can check that out at terricole.com/father wound. So before I get into the entire thing, if you happen to be new to my YouTube channel, well, hello and welcome. I want to make sure before we get moving that you are subscribed, that you hit that bell icon, because I put out new stuff every Tuesday and every Thursday. And since I put it out for you, I wouldn't want you to miss it. Thank you so much for all of your questions and comments on this channel. We're a very active community here, which I love so much. You know that I read them all and I love to highlight them. So this came from Lisa Smith, and it was under the video Trauma Bonding, Therapy Speak, and More with Dr. Perpetua Neo. You're now one of my concrete go-to guides for my own continued growth and healing. This episode is completely another gem to add to my valuable collection of heartfelt resources. Thank you both for your work. Why, Lisa Smith, thank you so much for taking the time to leave a comment. I appreciate you being a part of our YouTube community. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now let's move into today's story, which is a little bit different than usually I say let's move into today's content, but really today is me just sharing my story with you. All right. So father wound, how did I get it? How did it start? Well, I think I'll just start by sharing a little bit about my parents. My parents were high school sweethearts, basically. My father was a basketball star. My mother was a cheerleader. They were at rival schools, and they got together in high school. My father went to college, went to Union College on a full ride. My mother went to work at the GE factory right after high school graduation so she could save money to go to college. Both of my parents grew up poor, so there was no guarantee. Like my father was going to college because he had a full athletic scholarship. He was a basketball player and I think a football player as well. And my mother was working at the GE. And then she finally saved up enough money. So I guess a year and a half she was working to go to school at Oneonta, started her first semester, and then she got pregnant with my oldest sister over that Thanksgiving break. So that was the end of her college career. You can imagine how all of this backstory of my family, how my parents' story influenced my perception of all the things. My mother was really clear that she wanted us to get an education and that she wanted us to make our own money. Because keep in mind, my mother got pregnant during a time when abortion was not a choice. It was the late 50s. And I don't know that she would have chosen that anyway, but I'm just saying, like there wasn't options like it is today. Today, people don't care if you're married. People are having kids on their own. Everyone's having kids. It was different then though. And I think she was very grateful that my father married her, because to be an unwed mother in 1958 was not the greatest thing that you want to do. My parents went on to have 3 more daughters in a total of 6 years, basically. And here was my father, who was really, you would say like he was more of a guy's guy. You know how now people celebrate like a number 1 girl dad. I don't know that that was a thing then, and certainly not for him. My father was a workaholic. He was a high-functioning alcoholic. He was not home often, but I always had this feeling that I was a disappointment because I felt like he wanted a boy, and I felt like I was his last chance to have a boy, and then there it was, I was a girl. What's interesting about that story, and I mentioned this in the last episode a little bit, is that I just thought that was the truth. Right. And then years later, my mother was like, Terri, your father never said he wanted boys. He never said he was disappointed having daughters. And what I think happens, and this is from a therapeutic point of view, I know what happens, as children, we come up with stories to make sense of our world. We have limited ability, limited cognitive ability, and limited ability to basically understand the complex happenings of our lives. But we do what we can with the little brains that we have as we're growing up to make sense. So for me, it was way less painful, I now understand through therapy, to think that I was the wrong gender and that there was a reason why my father was not interested in me or my sisters, really. That was more palatable than the truth, which is that he just wasn't interested. I mean, because when you think about it, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference, right? I didn't make that up. That's someone else's quote. But I actually think it's kind of true. So it was painful to feel like my father was indifferent, because it's not like he wasn't in the house. Like, we grew up with him there until my parents got divorced when I was 13. And so he was there, but he was never actually there. We grew, all of us. My mother was afraid of him, and every one of me and all my sisters were afraid of him. So we avoided him as much as we possibly could. So how did this impact me? Well, I grew up being very comfortable being around women. Being very comfortable. I have the same friends I've had since I was 4 years old. Literally, I have the same there's 7 of us. Groups of women have always been my jam, which is funny. That's still true today. It's why I have a mastermind that's all female, why so much of my content is focused around women. And it's not that I'm anti-male or anyone identifies as a man. I'm not. It's just what my childhood experience sort of brought out in me, where women were safe and men were scary as hell, according to me. Not that I still feel that way, because I'm not afraid of my husband. I'm not afraid of my children. I have 3 sons. But it was really just growing up where there was no communication whatsoever. And to get my father's approval, I knew to do well in school, that was it. That was the only lever. And even then, it would almost be with like money. If you got good grades, he'd give you $20 or something. But it was never like a heartfelt conversation. And so that is difficult, to live in a house with someone that you're afraid of. And I found that how it impacted me relationship-wise is that it was a combination of things. As I was growing up, I went through attracting unavailable people. So emotionally unavailable people. And then once I figured out the emotional piece in therapy, I thought I'd figured it out perfectly. I was like, this is amazing. Now I'm attracted to all of these foreign men that from Europe and other countries, Greece and wherever, that they are so emotionally warm. They're available. They're affectionate, which was all the things my father wasn't. But then come to find out, they lived on another continent. And so my therapist was like, P.S., you didn't beat the system. You didn't crack the code because you're still left feeling the same way, which is you're longing. You're longing for the connection. You're longing for attachment. You're longing for physical affection. But of course, that wasn't there. The biggest thing for me, my own father wound, is that I grew up really feeling like I had to prove something and not feeling good enough, like always feeling like I needed to overfunction and overgive. And so it's funny, I wouldn't identify if you were to say, oh, does that mean you have low self-esteem or lack of confidence? Because it can absolutely present that way. But I wouldn't say that that's how it presented, even though the feeling underneath was that I needed to do more. But it was almost like overfunctioning and over-delivering helped those feelings of lack, where if I could get the accolades from people, if I could be the best friend that someone could have, or I could be the best employer, I could be whatever it is, I was always somebody that other people could count on, because that would give me that positive feedback that I was looking for. And I do think that underneath it all, certainly there was a worthiness problem, but I have to honestly say it felt so specific to my father and then to men, right? So specific, where I did not feel that way because I do not personally have a mother wound. I did not feel that way with my female friendships and my relationship with my sisters. And like I always had an easy flow with my female relationships. So really where my father wound revealed itself was in my romantic relationships, because I was certainly needy, controlling, demanding. I think I've in therapy handled many of those things, but I do think it is still kind of my nature to want to control things, and it takes conscious effort and lots of recovering from codependency and father wound stuff and attachment stuff to not play that out in my life. now. But it's interesting. It's like I wanted to be in control. Another thing for me that played out in having a father wound is that I couldn't control my father, and I couldn't control what was happening in my house growing up. And so what I found myself initially, I was drawn to the broken-winged bird relationships. So it was always someone who I could help fix, always someone who needed something. And what's interesting that by the time I did all this work and ended up with Vic, my husband, he was widowed with 3 teenage sons, raising these kids by himself. So in a way, he needed something too, but I feel like it was a healthy exchange. Like I found my family, and he found a willing partner to help raise these kids from their early teens on, basically. But I feel like if I hadn't done the work that I had done around the father wound, I don't know that I would have recognized Vic. I don't know, because for years, that wound was being played out in my relationship. And I think that expecting that I had to do it all had a lot to do with having a father wound, because I didn't feel like I could count on my father emotionally. Now, my father was dutiful fiscally. He paid for college, and trust me, I know that that's not nothing. Like, I feel incredibly blessed and privileged that that was my experience. And yet, when the thing that you want is the emotional connection, but someone is giving you a different connection, trying to. And I felt like with my father, there was a lot of checking boxes where he was dutiful. Like he was not a bad person. He was an ethical person. He was emotionally stunted. He really had massive emotional limitations, and nobody was doing therapy then. Like it wasn't that way. Now it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Everyone's in therapy, or lots and lots of people, and there's so much available online. My platform alone, I have almost 600 free videos on YouTube, right? You're watching one right now if you're watching this or you're listening to this podcast. There's so much that's out there. But when you think about, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. So what do you learn? You learn to accept. What I learned is that men are people to be managed. That's it. They're not people to tell the truth to. They're not people to have a heart connection to. They're literally people to sort of trick. And you let them think that they're kind of running the show, but really you're running the show behind the scenes, sort of. That seemed so not interesting to me. And I can say the truth is that within the family system, it's different now, but extended family, there's a decent amount of male bashing. There's a lot of women in my family and a lot of, that's just the way men are type of thing. And in my own therapy, I just had to get to a point where I was like, I don't want to subscribe to this limiting and demeaning identification of male. Like, this is how men are. I don't think so. I think that a lot of men are great. I found this with my husband, who is absolutely wonderful and had lots of therapy and has an emotional IQ and is really a wonderful human being and my best friend, without a doubt. But again, if I hadn't done the work on the father wound, I don't know that I would have recognized him. I don't think I would have. I wasn't ready for that, because what was required to be in a relationship with my husband was vulnerability. And that's one thing. That's how my father wound showed up, in that I did not want to be vulnerable in a romantic relationship. But really, it's hard for me even now. I'm super duper choosy as to who I'm vulnerable with. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that we should be discerning about who gets access to our most tender heart. But I think I'm a little bit more self-protective than I would have been if I didn't have the father wound. So for me, the way that in the end of the end, I was able to change the way that I related to my father after I started doing a lot of work on this in therapy. And the last year of my father's life in particular, I just decided I was going to change my relationship with him, and I was going to talk to him about things that were bothering me, and I was going to change the way we related. And I did. I tell this whole story in the Boundary Boss book about how I was graduating grad school, and I wasn't going to invite my father to my graduation because he hates New York City. He was living in Florida. He was already retired for many years. And when I said to my therapist, I'm not inviting my father to my grad school graduation, she was like, why? Why not? And I was like, because he won't come. That's why not. And she was like, yeah, well, let me ask you though, do you want him to come? Do you want to invite him? And I was like, well, I mean, yeah, kind of. Like, this is a big to-do. Like, I got my master's at NYU. I'm proud of the hard work that I did. I worked straight through. Like, this was not easy to do. So yeah, I wanted to like share it with him in a way. I don't know if I really wanted him to come, but I did want to tell him. And so she was like, well, then you should invite him anyway, Terri, because it's not about whether he'll come or not. It's about you being honest about the way that you feel. So I went to visit him in Florida, and that was my assignment, was that I needed to invite him to my graduation. And I waited until he was driving me back to the airport. I literally spent 3 days there, did not say one word about it. And I was like, oh my God, I can't fail. I can't go back and tell Bev I didn't do it, my therapist. So we're driving, and I was like, Dad? He was like, yeah. I was like, I got an extra ticket to graduation, which is the end of May. If you're around, you want to come? And he was like, I really can't, Terri. I really can't deal with New York. And I was like, it's okay. It's not a problem, And he was like, ugh, here comes the guilt. And I was like, dude, I haven't guilted you a day in my life is what I thought. But I was like, no, Dad, I really do understand that it's a lot. And I'm not taking it personally that you can't do it. But you're literally my only father. So what I want you to know is that my relationship with you is important to me. You are important to me. Mom will be there. My sisters will be there. But nobody can replace you. You're my only father. And so then he was like, okay. And then hugged a long hug goodbye, which was not like him at the airport. And what shifted in my relationship with him after that is he just started like sending me cards like, happy spring. Love Dad with his little chicken scratch. Like he was a man of very few words, but something changed. And we ended up having deeper conversations. And it turns out that was the last time I would see my father alive, because he died very suddenly that was May. He died that next November of a massive coronary. And so I had no regrets, of course, thank God. I was so grateful I said something to him, but there's something about realizing that it's negotiating for your needs. It's telling the truth, right? My therapist was very clear to say, your healing is in the asking. Your healing is in asserting what you really want, which was really hard for me to do. So I am super passionate about helping others heal their father wounds the same way that I have. And I will give you some prompts in the guide, terricole.com/guide. But also, you guys, the father wound course, it's coming up quick. So if you're interested, if you have a father wound, if it's impacting your life, go to terricole.com/father wound and join us, because I would be honored to walk you through this process.